So Dean Phillips actually did a lot better in New Hampshire.
What, 20%, right?
Oh, hi! Welcome to Uh-Oh Politics. This is a show where we talk about national politics, which is not tense or frustrating or, bad in any way.
Never.
Everything's hunky-dory over here.
Always.
I'm here with my co-host, Jared Valenzola.
And how are you, sir?
I'm good, Jared. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I don't think we've seen the people since the holiday season. I hope you had a great holiday, Christmas. Happy New Year.
You as well, I assume.
Thank you. Yeah, went very well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, it's
no
funny.
No complaints.
We last time we met was before Christmas.
Right.
And we were like, okay, our next episode, we're going to be covering the primary season. We're going to be in it right in the middle of the primaries.
Right.
And primaries came and went over the course of basically a week or two.
Yes. I didn't realize, maybe goes to show how little I was paying attention to the calendar. I didn't realize New Hampshire was that close after Iowa.
Is it always that
I don't
close?
think so. I don't recall.
Yeah, it was, what, 2 weeks?
No, it was 8 days. I think
days.
Iowa was Monday, January 15th, and then New Hampshire was Tuesday, January 23rd. So it was a pretty quick swing.
So on Iowa and New Hampshire, the reason I say that primary season came and went is because Donald Trump had a decisive victory in both Iowa and New Hampshire, which is very significant because, at least in my perusing of 538, no Republican nominee has won both Iowa and New Hampshire since going back, 4 decades or so.
I think it's interesting. One of the things that Republicans, especially these Republican candidates, and of course, Governor DeSantis dropped out before the New Hampshire primary. Everybody.
Meatball Ron!
Yeah, everybody, Ron DeSanctimonious.
Everybody
pretty much was out. I think that for Republicans, especially the Republican candidates, there was this notion that there was perhaps a stronger, I don't even say anti-Trump, just voters looking for a Trump alternative in the Republican primary. Now, could that have been possible if it was only Ron DeSantis or only Nikki Haley? Potentially. I just think that a lot of pundits, a lot of activists, a lot of people within the Republican Party overestimated the amount of voters that would look at alternative candidates to Donald Trump. He is running, frankly, like he's an incumbent president again, right?
Sure.
And you point out, no Republican has won Iowa and New Hampshire, again, unless they're pretty much unopposed, like Trump was in 2020 or Bush was in 2004. So
even in 2016, Trump didn't win Iowa.
Correct. Ted Cruz did. So I think what ends up happening, what is happening here, and it's the first time it's happened in modern American political history, right? Everybody knows about Grover Cleveland. I say everybody. Of course, Grover Cleveland is the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. But as you know, Ann, the party nominating process back then was significantly different than the party nominating process is now. Back then, 1800s, you go to the convention, smoke-filled rooms, smoke-filled halls, and a candidate emerged. So obviously Cleveland was able to cobble together enough delegates. I mean, even Teddy Roosevelt, when he ran for a 3rd term in 1912, left the Republican Party and started his own because he couldn't get through a convention. So those were in convention settings. This is the first time in modern American political history that you've had a defeated president who ran for a 2nd term and lose run again in the primary season. He has and enjoys the advantages of being an incumbent, frankly. Obviously, he's not, but for all intents and purposes,
it depends who you ask, because a significant portion of the Republican Party does believe that Trump won the 2020 election, which is such a piece of contention in terms of, a distinction between the moneyed interests that are involved within the Republican Party, for lack of a better term, the Nikki Haley adjacent kind of part of the Republican Party. But then pretty much most of the MAGA part of the party, it's something like 7 in 10 of Republicans believe that Trump won in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, I believe the Patriots won Super Bowl 42 and actually completed an undefeated season. I mean, look, that's a discussion that's been hashed out for many years. I think when you do the final analysis of the 2020 election, Democrats were more organized at early voting and voting by mail than Republicans were. And Republicans suffered significantly. So yeah, Republicans won at the ballot box because people showed up at the ballot box. Republicans at a greater proportion voted on election day than they did by mail.
Voted in person.
And that's obviously why I believe not just President Trump, but Republicans, top to bottom, were fairly unsuccessful in 2020. So, but that being said, regardless of what people think of the results of 2020, where, President Trump himself has acknowledged he lost, right? I mean, he acknowledged in 2021 he lost. June of 2021.
I don't think that's exactly accurate.
He acknowledged he lost. So,
well, he is bandied about certain words and phrases, but I think even today, if you were to ask him, he would say, 2020 was rigged. If he were to say that he lost, it would be like, well, I only lost because the election was rigged and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the direct quote, but the point overall is he's running and enjoying the strappings of being an incumbent.
Yes.
Obviously,
Yeah.
He's not, but considering he was president 4 years ago, that is.
But that gets to an important question about the other candidates who are taking on Trump, because all of them also had that kind of understanding that Trump was running as an incumbent, and all of them were kind of reluctant to really put forward.
Well, I think that was it, and that's a good point, Ian. I found it interesting that you're running against him, but for the most part, you won't name him by name. Again, with the exception of Chris Christie.
Sure, Chris Christie, who's just there to.
Forgot he was running. Don't know why he was running.
Well, he was very clearly running
right.
to just say to people, "Hey, Trump's a really awful person."
Yeah, and obviously that message didn't resonate.
Oh yeah.
But the thing is, I believe, to your point, it's right, and I would watch those debates, and I would think to myself, well, if you're running again, you need, and I'm saying this, speaking to these candidates, you need to get through Donald Trump. Why are you not taking time to point out his record or things of that nature? I think Trump made a brilliant move not going to the debates. I think he
a very easy move.
It was very easy.
If you're ahead 50 points in the polls, why are you
going?
Bother?
Right.
Yeah.
If
you put yourself on stage, you're saying I'm equal with these people that
and I'm not.
Doesn't
right.
care about.
Right.
And,
so again, I think that if you had one candidate, it'd be interesting to see. Obviously, Nikki Haley is at least going through South Carolina. Of course, she's the former governor of South Carolina. That said, I didn't have a chance to look at any polling this week. I think she's still down by a significant number.
Very significant
in South Carolina. Yes. They're not even contesting Nevada. I think that she probably trudges on, just in the event that something happens to President Trump, whether it be on any of the indictments or any of the trials that he's a part of, that she feels that if she can at least cobble together enough delegates, that it should something like that happen before the convention, she would be able to go into the convention with some say and some sway and be able to wrestle a nomination. And that way, again, should something happen to President Trump, which I personally don't think will happen. I'm not a legal scholar, and we don't have the expertise to debate those things. But
well, it's also a question of, even if there were legal troubles for Trump, if that would have any impact on his support, because his support has been holding strong despite any of his previous legal troubles and his current legal troubles.
Right. Well,
so future legal troubles, it's probably going to be the same thing.
Right, and I'm sure you know with the way conventions work, if you're sent as a delegate for a certain candidate, you're bound to vote for that candidate on the first round of balloting anyway. So, so it's going to be Trump's nomination, and it to me it is interesting that most Americans polled. This is why you can't really trust polls. But most Americans polled don't want a Trump-Biden rematch, and yet we're going to get a Trump-Biden rematch. I will say that I've found it intriguing, some of the critiques by MAGA Republicans, because they're not conservatives, really. I mean, I'm a conservative. But I think a lot of MAGA Republicans noting that Nikki Haley in Iowa and New Hampshire had a high propensity of former Democrat voters switch to Republican registration so they could vote for her. And to that I said, well, first of all, as you know, Ian, I'm a registered Republican. I can only vote in a Republican primary.
Sure.
A lot of times there's not a lot of action there. My mom is unenrolled. She goes back and forth.
Right.
She usually votes in Democrat primaries, frankly, because there's nothing to vote for in the Republican primaries, in Massachusetts usually. Well, the same holds true at the national election, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in Iowa 4 years ago, there was nothing to vote for in a Republican caucus, so you switch to Democrat and you caucus in the Democratic caucus. And now 4 years later, again, you switched from Democrat to Republican. What I think that segment of voters is about, though, those segment of voters, I think, were saying or trying to say to the GOP, we can't stand Biden and we don't want to vote for Biden, but there's no way in hell we're voting for Donald Trump either.
Sure.
So if you give us Nikki Haley, which is the option now,
Right.
I think Ron DeSantis, we'll vote for them. We'll vote for them in a general election over Joe Biden.
Well,
but we can't bring ourselves to vote for Donald Trump. And I think that's what a lot of those voters, and again, it wasn't enough to overcome
Sure.
Trump's significant advantage in the Republican primary, but I think there is a large swath of voters out there that should the GOP have nominated, and I'm talking like it's over, but it pretty much is over.
Oh yeah.
As we do this in late January, early February, it'll be interesting in the final analysis whether Trump wins or loses, what the result would have looked like had the party nominated Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley. I mean, they were really the only two serious ones.
But what I want to say is that they were running in kind of opposite directions. Ron DeSantis was very much running as, I am Trump, but I don't have Trump's past
Right.
and current legal troubles. And Nikki Haley was running as, for lack of a better term, a 2012 Republican, someone in the vein of Mitt Romney, someone who's just kind of like, let's
Bush.
focus on national policy and,
Right.
things that aren't the populist arguments that Trump is offering right now.
Right.
And Haley had the same problem, I think. The problem that most Republican candidates had in 2016, which was trying to thread the needle of trying to get more people to like her while also not making any attacks against Donald Trump, because Trump has the majority of the base. And now Haley's switching her strategy, but it's too little too late, it seems like, where now that she's actually ramping up attacks and saying, Donald Trump's not mentally fit for the job, he, has done X, Y, and Z, and it's stuff that she wasn't saying a year ago, and now it seems like it's pie in the sky for her. There's nothing Nikki Haley can do at this point, in my opinion, that would net her any state.
No, I agree.
And her own state, which is the next to vote, is not going to vote for her either. So
Exactly.
It's basically just a question of how many attacks does Nikki Haley want to put forward before she gets in line with the rest of the Republicans and eventually endorses Trump. Because that's the other thing as well, is that Trump being vindictive, it actually has an impact on how people endorse him, right? We've seen how people that Trump has attacked personally in 2016, like Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, they eventually fall in line, and they basically do that because despite the attacks that they put against Trump, they don't want to end up on his bad list.
Yeah, so Nikki Haley's an interesting one. I don't see her endorsing Trump. I really don't.
Really?
I don't. I know DeSantis. I know
Do you
everybody
see her
else has.
endorsing Biden?
She won't endorse Biden. I just got a feeling she probably stays out of it. I think she served in Trump's administration, obviously, as UN ambassador. She ran this year, I think, because I think she realizes, I don't want to say her relevancy, but I mean, she was UN ambassador 8 years ago,
Sure.
right? She was governor 10 years ago. I mean, that's, they say a day in politics is an eternity. What's 10 years?
Sure.
10 years is 100 lifetimes, right? So I don't see her endorsing Biden by any stretch of the imagination. I don't see her falling in lockstep with Donald Trump either. I think she is the outlier, again, much like a Chris Christie, who was fairly irrelevant through most of the primary season to begin with. I see her as sort of the outlier. Like, you make a correct point about Governor DeSantis. Governor DeSantis was and is a true conservative, right? And he's governed Florida like a conservative. He's been unabashed in his policies, some of which I've disagreed with.
Conservative, but Ron DeSantis was leaning much more into the culture war aspects.
Well, he was, right. So
Nikki Haley, who's doing the whole kind of,
Yeah, I mean, to your point about DeSantis trying to sort of beat Trump without the baggage, and it's the same thing I said about Ramaswamy, right? If you're running against if Donald Trump's not in the primary as a candidate, then that strategy works because
Sure.
somebody.
Someone's trying to fill the void.
But if I'm
Yeah.
standing there, and this is where I think Ramaswamy's campaign was poor, and I think even DeSantis's was poor because Ramaswamy had no clue what he was doing.
Sure.
DeSantis
he was just there
Right.
to make a lot of noise.
DeSantis is was a former congressman and a current governor. He's
Yes.
won some elections.
Right.
If I'm given the option of Donald Trump or somebody like, if I'm a Trump voter, and of course I never say who I'm voting for, but if I'm a Trump voter,
Now, that's your endorsement of Biden, right?
No.
That's, right?
No.
We just got that on the record. So when we edit this in post,
Yes.
I'm going to put in a shot of you nodding your head after I said
yank
that.
that out. No. But if you're running, if I'm a voter, and I really love Donald Trump.
If you're a voter.
If I'm a voter.
If you're a voter.
Hypothetical GOP voter. And I really love Donald Trump. I'm going to vote for Donald Trump.
Sure.
Why would I vote for Ramaswamy or Ron DeSantis?
Why would you vote for someone who is not Donald?
Right, as I say, sort of the knockoff of Trump.
Yeah.
Like they are knockoffs. Why would I vote for the knockoff if I can have the real thing?
Right.
And I don't think Ramaswamy certainly didn't understand that, although I guess he was really just running for the opportunity to meet Trump. And then, DeSantis again just surprises me that he didn't, well, I shouldn't say that. I think he understood that. Again, I think, and he said it in his what do you call it, dropout speech, withdrawal speech from the primary.
No, his victory speech saying mission accomplished.
Accomplished.
I'm ending my campaign
Right.
now because I've done everything I wanted to do.
So when he ended his campaign, he made the point in the basically, there's just not enough voters out there that want an alternative to Trump. They want Donald Trump, and that's that's been proven through vote. I mean that the polls were saying that. I think DeSantis put all his eggs in the Iowa basket. Didn't really work out for him. Haley put all her eggs in the New Hampshire basket. It didn't really work out for her. I said, she needed to come within 5 points for it to still be kind of considered a legitimate race. I think in the final analysis, she lost by over 10.
Yeah.
So still not bad. But, and again, New England Republicans, New Hampshire Republicans are a lot different voter
Sure.
than South Carolina or any of those southern states are going
They
to
actually
be.
got mad at Nikki Haley for not mentioning slavery.
Right. So, I think it's going to be over. I think by the time we do, after South Carolina's done, which I know is at the end of February, I believe.
Sure.
I mean, she's not even contesting Nevada, so, which is a weird one. It's like a caucus and a primary. But, it'll be interesting to see. And then it comes down to who President Trump decides to pick to be his running mate.
Perfect transition, Jared. Who's the next VP?
My money is on Elise Stefanik, who's a congresswoman from New York. Wow. She is the number 3 or number 4.
I mean, she definitely wants the job.
Sure.
She's definitely
Sure.
putting on the performance of
She is.
Trump. Look at me. I'm here to do this.
She is. She's an interesting one. She's young. I think she's still under 40. It's intriguing to me, and I'm a big fan of Elise Stefanik.
Really?
Yeah, I like Elise Stefanik.
Okay.
I
don't.
appreciate I'm a young Republican. I'm in the Young Republicans. She's a young Republican. So, I appreciate that activism. I think, though, it is interesting that her voting record isn't as conservative as someone like Liz Cheney's was, right?
Sure.
I mean, Liz Cheney had a 92% American Conservative Union rating, whereas Elise Stefanik is, 50s and 60s. That's
But
why,
Elise
again,
Stefanik has had a hard pivot in the past few years, though.
yeah, no, and I mean, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it has to be a woman or an African American. So I think Tim Scott could be another option.
But so that's a good point, which is that it's theoretically, often is the case with a VP pick, is you're trying to consolidate your base and get people who otherwise might not have voted for you. Realistically, there's not many people that vote for a VP instead of a president.
Correct.
So it's kind of, who cares? But theoretically speaking, Donald Trump would want someone who is different from him in terms of politics, theoretically someone more moderate to consolidate that outside of the MAGA kind of base. So you would think someone like Tim Scott or Nikki Haley.
Well, I was going to say Nikki Haley would be probably the best option.
But again, it gets to kind of the issue of Trump being kind of vindictive against his
It will
opponents.
not. It will not be Nikki Haley.
Right, and
I
Nikki
can-
Haley also doesn't want the
Right,
job.
and I could say that on some level of informed authority that
Sure.
it's not going to be Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
But I agree, Nikki Haley would be the best because, you know, you look at some of the better tickets in American presidential history. I mean, none better than Reagan Bush, right? I mean, Reagan. Not, you know, they own the third and first largest landslides in electoral history.
Yes.
So the ticket was perfect because, to your point, Reagan was that conservative, had that cowboy mantra coming out of California. Back when California was a red state. Bush, the more moderate, the seasoned, family of public service. They ran a very contentious primary against each other in 1980, and then Reagan made the choice of Bush to balance that ticket.
Yeah.
And then obviously, you know, they defeated Jimmy Carter, who, you know, when they did that in 1980, was the third largest at that time, the second. You know, Nixon in 72 was the first, and then of course 84. You know, they won 49 out of 50 states. So, you know, the better tickets are the tickets.
Mondale was that close, Jared.
Yes. It's funny, if you go back, tangent, if you go back, you know, Ian and I love watching, like, election night every 4 years. It's the best.
Oh,
thing to
it's so
consume.
much fun. 2016, oh man, what a great night that was.
Who's going to win this state? Who's going to win that state? If you go back and just watch election night coverage, you can watch it on YouTube from 1984. The question isn't whether Ronald Reagan is getting reelected.
Sure.
He's absolutely
Yeah.
getting reelected. The only thing they're talking about all night is will he win all 50 states?
Yeah.
And he came within 3,500 votes in Minnesota
Yeah.
of winning all 50 states. And of course, President Reagan quipped, Christmas 1984, a member of the media asked him, is there anything, you know, you want for Christmas, Mr. President? And he goes, Minnesota would have been nice. But to that end, back to the ticket here, I've found just in my, you know, presidential electoral historical study that the tickets where you've had your primary challengers, where you put them on your ticket,
Sure.
have tended to perform better because there is some recognition, there is some name ID, you know, and I say Elise Stefanik seems to be in the pole position from a lot of what I'm hearing. That's just my opinion. A congressman's not the strongest choice. You know, you generally want a senator who represents a whole state.
Sure.
You know, have stronger fundraising prowess than a congressman. But again, a Tim Scott, who, you know, did run in the primary, didn't survive beyond any sort of, you know, got to no voting. Like, I don't think he made any ballots, or if he's on ballots, it's you know, he dropped out before voting began.
And despite his moderate track record, immediately endorsed Trump.
Right.
Because I think on some level he is
Well,
prepared
he's-
to accept
yeah,
that
he
that
would
job.
He would be. So
Unlike Nikki Haley.
Right. So then again, you have Nikki Haley, who, I mean, I think that would be the smartest choice for Trump. I know he's not going to make it. So it'll be curious to see where he goes. I mean, there's Elise Stefanik, there's Tim Scott. A lot of people bandy about Tucker Carlson. I personally, I've always been a big fan of Tucker Carlson, but I just don't see, sure, dating back to his CNN Crossfire days, I just don't see how or why I mean, politics has become entertainment these days, so
Sure.
which I love.
A perverse kind of entertainment.
It
a
is.
cringe comedy.
Well,
kind
again,
of
as Fred
entertainment.
Thompson, who's a former senator from Tennessee and
former actor from
Law and Order and other films, used to say Washington, D.C. is Hollywood for ugly people.
Sure.
So, but the point is, like, Tucker Carlson's a pundit. Now you're going to make him the vice president of the United States.
I mean, it worked for Trump. Trump was
Yeah,
a TV guy who became
Right. I mean, Trump is a
president of
50-year
America.
brand. Right. So it did. I think Trump is the outlier in that sense.
Sure.
I think, because I think one of the detractions of, not detractions, but I think one of the issues of Trump's presidency was, you know, I talked to a lot of Republicans.
one of the detractors.
Well,
one
I
of
think
the
there's
few
this,
detractors.
I think there's a lot, sometimes when you, like, again, back to Ramaswamy, who just, as a friend of mine would put it, wants to take a sledgehammer to the federal government. Now, there's a lot of things that we don't even have time to discuss that I would, you know, my perfect view of the American government and political system. But that said, one of the things that I think Ramaswamy and so many of these other people forget is, if you're president of the United States, you do get to govern, you're in the executive branch, but there's 535 other people who have a say in the government.
Sure.
100 of them are in the Senate, 435 of them are in the House. You got to kind of get them to go along with it too. Unless you want to rule by executive order, in which case executive orders come and executive orders go with the executives. And I don't know if anybody's noticed this lately, but we've kind of been going back and forth between Republican and Democrat presidents. You know, we haven't had one party dominate the presidency for some time. I mean, Democrats with FDR and Truman was probably the last long string of single party domination of the executive branch.
Right.
You know, before that, obviously Republicans after the Civil War into the early 20th century. So like it doesn't, there's this belief, and I'm not sure where it comes from, that like, and this has sort of been pervading in the Republican primary. It's like, well, we'll have Trump for 4 more years, and then we'll get Ron DeSantis for 8 years in 2028. It's like, well, what makes you think he's going to get 8 years?
Sure.
Neither party has won 3 straight presidential elections since the aforementioned Reagan and then Bush.
Right.
And even then Bush lost re-election,
Right.
right? So Gore could not win after Clinton. McCain couldn't win after Bush. Clinton couldn't win after Obama. It's not easy to do that.
Yeah.
The American public generally wants to go back and forth.
But at the same time, most presidents have gotten 2 terms. And this is a relatively...
Oh, this is
phenomenon.
unique. Yeah, we
Yeah.
have 2 one-term presidents facing off for a second term. This is a unique circumstance right now that we're in. That's what I said at the top. This is the only time in American political history this has happened, right? I mean, you haven't, in this modern system, right? You haven't had, again, Bush didn't run in 96, Carter didn't run in 84, and then before that, I mean, you know, you didn't have a one-term president before that since Herbert Hoover, right? So
Right.
I mean, and he didn't try and make a comeback in 1936. So so it's unique. But again, you know, I think whoever Trump picks for vice president, I think the ideal candidate is someone who brings balance, someone who can help coalesce the GOP base, because you need all of the GOP. I know that they love to throw out the rhinos, but then like, well, you do need their votes to win, right? Immediately peeling off people who
Theoretically,
might
at
be
least.
inclined to vote for you and tell them, I don't want your vote, you don't belong here, well, then they're not going to vote for you. And that's just a basic political lesson that I like to try and give people, Republicans and Democrats. And we see it with Democrats. If there are races, maybe not necessarily for president, but if there are races, I've seen it for state representative, where Democrats have had primaries, they don't come together, the Republican wins. So it's true on both sides. So, you know,
I think Democrats have more work to do with consolidating a wider range of political beliefs, whereas Republicans, you're kind of with 2 distinct camps, but
Yeah, we
both
are
of
these
which
days.
have a kind of Venn diagram overlap.
Yeah, there
between
is.
the MAGA brand and the
traditional conservative.
traditional conservative, let's say outdated conservative, let's say
Yeah, I mean, it's
obsolete
interesting.
conservative.
You know, it's one of those things where, like, you know, I've made the analogy before, right? People talk about President Bush and the wars, and I'm more of a dove than a hawk. But that said, would Donald Trump have acted any differently in the days after 9/11 than President Bush? I don't think so, right? I don't think any president would have. I think Republican or Democrat, you would have likely had the same outcome, right? America's attacked. The president responded, as far as I believe, in hindsight. You know, Iraq was obviously a mistake, and the amount of time spent in Afghanistan was far too long. But you can't relitigate that.
But that was a benefit to Trump in 2016 because he was running against a bunch of people who stood by Bush's initial reaction. And Donald Trump, being someone who was basically apolitical at that time, got to have the benefit of, oh yeah, I always thought that was bad. I would have totally done things differently.
Right,
and
but
I
like,
don't need to prove that.
yeah, but I mean, he can say that, but I don't.
I mean,
I don't believe it. I don't believe no president. If Al Gore won the 2000 election, which a lot of Democrats
Which, you know,
like to
he
believe he did, right? Exactly. It's kind of funny how like, oh, Republicans are the ones who don't, believe election results. Well, we're not the ones who started that.
It's not disbelieving election results. It's merely criticizing the fact that the Supreme Court decided to sway the election towards Bush, and that Roger Stone made.
I don't think they swayed it towards Bush. But 2 fun facts. One, if Al Gore,
this is going to be so fun.
If Al Gore did a recount of the entire state of Florida instead of cherry picking counties that he believed he should have performed better in than he did, he probably would have won Florida. That was proven. If he just recounted the whole state, he probably would have won the whole state. But he wanted to recount counties where he was strongest. Number two, this is my favorite, if Al Gore just won his home state, he would have been president of the United States. But Tennessee said no to Mr. Gore.
And also, if we didn't have an electoral college, we wouldn't be having any of these conversations.
I think we've set up our debate for the next episode.
Oh, jeez.
I should have wore. I'll wear my electoral college sweatshirt. I love the electoral college.
Yeah, I bet you do.
Yeah, especially when Reagan's winning 525 electoral votes. It's a nice red.
So the red wave.
Yes.
Coming back. So the last thing I wanted to touch on,
Yes.
because I know you got to go. I know you're a busy man.
High demand.
I know you're meeting with Donald Trump in the hopes of being his VP pick.
I don't know. Well, so
Breaking news.
no, I'm not meeting with President Trump. That said, though, if I got the call, it'd be kind of hard to say no to that. Vice President of the United States. How could I say no to that? How could I say no?
I think it would go a little something like this. No.
Yeah, I don't think I could say no to that.
All right, but the one other thing
I'd settle for ambassador to the Vatican.
Ooh, okay, that would be a pretty good one.
Fun fact, here's your politics second fun fact of the day. My dream political job, ambassador to the Holy See.
I would take all right, so we make a new position, and I would be secretary of fun.
Okay.
All right, one more thing that I wanted to
Yes.
get to. Operation Lone Star. There's a big deal going on at the border of Texas right now. Obviously, immigration's been a very divisive issue for a long time in American politics.
Sure.
But right now, we have a situation where the federal government is coming into conflict with the Texas state government. Governor Greg Abbott is trying to basically seal off Eagle Pass. The Supreme Court has come down with the decision that the federal government has a right to remove the razor wire that has been placed at the border as a deterrent. But Abbott is saying that he will not allow federal government officials into the area. What's going on here?
Well, I'm a firm believer in federalism. So I think that absent federal action, and I am aware that foreign policy, of which immigration would be considered foreign policy, was one of the keystone or cornerstone reasons for the creation of the federal government. I believe, however, that states have a right to defend themselves should it be absent of federal action. And I think
Now, to that point, though, absent of federal action, there is currently a bill that had bipartisan support. It was the lumping together of aid to Ukraine as well as stricter border policy and enforcement. That bill now seems to have soured with Republicans, specifically because soon-to-be winner of the nominee for the Republican Party, Donald Trump, has said he doesn't want Biden to get a policy win. So Republicans, who are currently criticizing Biden for not doing anything about the border, are also no longer voting for a bipartisan bill that would be providing security to the border.
politics is fun, isn't it? And look,
Politics is uh-oh.
I mean, if you have a bill and it does what we as Republicans have wanted for a lot of years, you pass it. Period.
But it's not passing.
Yeah. No, look, I mean, I don't agree with Republicans in Congress abdicating their responsibility to vote on legislation, regardless of who the president is.
And not only are they not voting on that, they're also drafting articles of impeachment against Secretary Mayorkas for Homeland Security on the grounds that he is also not doing anything to secure the border.
And let me guess, he would need to be removed by 2/3 of the Senate as well?
Yeah, it's purely a ceremonial kind of.
Yeah. Look,
guy
I mean, I think they should pass it. I think they need to pass it. And
You hear him, Mike Johnson?
aid to Ukraine shouldn't be baked in, but you know what? it should be passed, and it's an issue that
Well, but
we've been
the
talking
reason
about
it is
for a lot of
baked in
years.
is because Republicans didn't want to pass it separately. They only said that they would be willing to pass it if it was specifically connected to border policy.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. You know, if the only people in this world that can get whatever they want all of the time are babies. So, you know, life's compromised sometimes, and you have to compromise with other people who are in the same position you are.
But is the idea that for Republicans that this kind of plays out? I mean, I'm thinking back to something like the Merrick Garland situation, right, where it's kind of putting your eggs in the basket of if we get the next presidency, we'll get you know, the next chance to make policy on our own. Is the idea that it's just putting all of their eggs in the Donald Trump basket so that they can make their own border policy once he's back in office?
I mean, I think it's a little different than the Merrick Garland situation. I mean, that was a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. Again, Republicans had control of the Senate. You get to do those things. And now, look, Democrats control the Senate now, and if Democrats control the Senate under a president, you know, Trump's second term, similar situation happens. I would suppose they would be within their right to do the same thing. They don't have to take action on a Trump Supreme Court appointment.
Stalemate forever. It seems like that's going to be a really good idea.
That'll be it.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to go. But thanks very much for tuning in to Uh-Oh Politics, and we will see you in the next episode. Hopefully, we'll still have stuff to talk about with the primary. And
Well, I'm sure there'll be something we can talk about.
yeah, Dean Phillips, you're still welcome on anytime.
Anytime, Dean Phillips.
After your strong second place in New Hampshire. So yeah, come on. Come on to Uh-Oh Politics.
Democrat risks hurting in New Hampshire for that write-in.
Yeah, I know, right? It's a Lisa Murkowski situation all over again.
Right.
But thanks very much for tuning into Uh-Oh Politics, and we will see you later. Bye-bye.